So it is 2020 Oceans Pathway here at the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we have experts from all over the world here in Montreal discussing the key priorities for oceans, for coastal and marine biodiversity, and how it's related to both the Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And we're very happy to be joined today by the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean, Ambassador Peter Thomson.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
No, it's my pleasure.
And I do know that you have a very busy schedule and many invitations to join events all over the world. So I wanted to ask why you felt it was important to be here this week.
Okay. Yeah, here we are in Montreal, and thanks for all the snow outside. When I saw this meeting, I really wanted to carve out 3 days just to sit with all these, what I would call SDG 14.2 people, and that's technical speak for the people that are concerned about the conservation and protection of our coastal and marine ecosystems. Everything from coral reefs to mangroves to seagrass to tidal flats. These are the people who are working on this on a day-to-day basis. And SDG 14.2 is going to mature in 2020. There are 4 targets of SDG 14 that mature in 2020. And this is one of them, the coastal and marine ecosystems one. So I really wanted to sit down with these people whose work it is to make that target be met, because it's only 7 months to go now between now and the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon. So this is very important 3 days for me.
Right. Could you talk a little bit more about that, the links between biodiversity and the ocean agenda, how the two communities are working together?
That's a good question, because it's really important that the expression is silos, but it's not really silos. I think it's whether it's the climate community or the biodiversity community or the ocean community. In the past, they have tended to sort of work in their own areas, and that's understandable because everybody's so busy these days. But one of my roles has been to bring those communities together. And I think as far as the climate-ocean communities are concerned now, we consider ourselves to be fully integrated. We talk about the Ocean Climate Nexus, and you'll see a lot of work on that in Madrid, in the Blue COP next month. But when it comes to biodiversity and the ocean, we're tied at the hip through things like marine protected areas. SDG 14.5, that was derived from the Aichi targets. So we're tied at the hip on things like that, and we've got to make sure that we're working together closely on this. I would also say that the pathway to the CBD COP in Kunming next October has to go through a very important gate, and that's the Ocean Conference in Lisbon. So one of the things that I'm really putting a lot of effort into is making sure that there is a very strong understanding between the organizers of those two conferences about what we're setting out to achieve. And also, may I say, the IUCN Ministerial Congress in Marseille, which is happening shortly after the Lisbon conference. So Lisbon and Marseille will both be important gateways for us to get to Kunming and have success there.
Excellent. So you talk about the ocean conference is taking place next year. Just to go back a little bit on the history, there was an historic ocean conference that the UN had in 2017. Can you give us an update on how the follow-up has been to that conference?
Yeah, I think, if looking back on it, because I think, as you know, I was President of the General Assembly at the time, and it was, what I announced at the beginning of the year would be the jewel in the crown of that session of the United Nations General Assembly, the Ocean Conference. It was, as you know, a resounding success. And if I consider what that success was, I think the main description would be that it gave an awareness around the world of the need for ocean action. I'm in a different country, every second day meeting with governments and organizations who are involved in ocean action. And I can tell you that everybody is now engaged in ocean action, which was not the case when we were trying to put SDG 14 together at the United Nations, where we were really struggling to say, look, ocean's in trouble. We need to be not only having an SDG on the ocean, but we need to get ocean action underway in governments and communities around the world. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm happy to say that from that ocean conference in New York in 2017, that's an observable outcome that pretty much every country, even the landlocked countries, have got ocean awareness now. They have to, because 50% of their oxygen comes from the ocean. So they've got skin in the game to make sure the ocean ecosystem is functioning in a healthy way.
Absolutely. And another one of the key outcomes from that conference was these 1,400 voluntary commitments that organizations made. What's been the follow-up for that? Is there a plan in place? What are the guarantees to make sure that those move from promises to real action?
Sure. Well, voluntary commitment is exactly that. Nobody can force you to do it. But DESA, the UN DESA, did an analysis of the voluntary commitments. There was 1,500 of them, I think, came out of the conference in New York. And it was that analysis which sort of led to the formation of these communities of ocean action, 3 of which are meeting here in Montreal today. And DESA will do a further analysis before the June conference of how these voluntary commitments have been progressing. And now I should also say that member states, in their wisdom, in reaching the mandating resolution, reaching consensus on the mandating resolution for the Lisbon conference, they have said that the 3 outcomes of the conference will be a report from the co-chairs of the interactive dialogues that will be held at the conference, that there will be an intergovernmentally agreed declaration on further ocean action required. But thirdly, they've also said there will be a list of voluntary commitments made since 2017. So this demand for voluntary commitments lists is actually coming from member states. And obviously we will do our best to make sure that that's a very full list like the first UN Ocean Conference. Mm-hmm. But my message to everybody would be lists and things, that's all very well and that's great. Let's use that in a positive way. But the important thing is action. Are you actually out there planting mangroves? And are you actually out there setting up and governing marine protected areas, etc.? And the reporting is actually secondary to that, and the voluntary commitments are actually secondary to that. The really important thing is taking action. And as I say, go around the world and you'll see that people are taking ocean action everywhere, Okay.
So you mentioned several big events that are happening in 2020, our Biodiversity Conference in Kunming, the next or follow-up Ocean Conference in Lisbon, the IUCN Congress is happening in Marseille. So we can see that next year is going to be a hugely important year for both biodiversity and for the ocean agenda. How can we make sure that we are seizing the opportunity of what that next year presents?
Yeah, and I think there are 2 other important meetings that we have to bring into the picture. One is, again, it was requested by member states, this special meetings, which some people call the Nature Summit, which will be held during the high-level week in New York in September. So there's that. And then also, of course, there is the COP in Glasgow in December next year, where countries are expected to come and raise their nationally determined contributions. So that's why it's a super year, because it's climate, it's biodiversity, it's ocean, and a chance for us to make a new deal with nature, because we know that's seriously out of whack at the moment. We need a new deal with nature which is based on respect and balance, to get us back into harmony with nature. So that's 2020 is regarded by many people as a make or break year in that regard. So, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of Kunming. I think it's actually, one of the most important gatherings of humanity that there has been, because we're going to set, as I say, this new relationship with nature, hopefully. Practical examples, we've been talking this morning about marine protected areas and whether we will get to the 10% by 2020, which is the goal set under the Aichi targets, but also set under SDG 14.5. So I'm very confident we'll get there. We've got a lot of work to do between now and June to get there, but I'm confident we'll get there. But by the time we get to Kunming, I would like to see, and I believe the majority of people would like to see, a new target which is 30% of the ocean by 2030. So, that's a practical example of how setting these targets, having these conferences, setting targets, and then working towards them can help us get to that new deal with nature, which we're trying to reset.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
No, my pleasure.